You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of July, 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza announced by Donald Trump but not by the parties. We'll explore whether this could be the one that actually holds. From there to Vietnam, which has just completed a massive administrative overhaul, basically halving the number of cities and regions. We'll also hear from our own editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, about Monocle's new quality of life survey. We'll have our Paris bureau chief, Simon Bouvier, talking about a French ban on outdoor smoking, and after that,
I realized I was also very intrinsically Brazilian. So it seemed to me like a good fit to work for Brazil and maybe on the side develop something artistic as I went along.
Brazil's singing ambassador to the UK, interviewed by our very own musical curator and resident Brazilian, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Could a measure of calm be about to return to the Middle East? 1 week or so after Donald Trump announced a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, before the sides announced the deal themselves, Trump now says that Israel has agreed terms on a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza, and he's warned Hamas that it will not get a better deal than this. Whether the two sides themselves announce any kind of deal, as Israel and Iran did last week, remains an open question at this point. Well, let's get the latest now with Julie Norman, Senior Associate Fellow on the Middle East at RUSI. Julie, good to have you back on the show. What do we know, first of all, about this 60-day ceasefire deal beyond Trump announcing that some sort of terms have been agreed?
Well, Chris, I'd say there's not a lot of details public yet, but what we do know is that the proposed terms are pretty similar to what we saw back in May. It would see a release of some of the hostages in kind of a first phase, this first 60 days in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, with the idea that those 60 days would be used to reach some kind of agreement on a permanent end and a kind of permanent ceasefire. That's always been the sticking point, however, and it's unclear if there's anything new in this current agreement, these current terms, that would get past that impasse, which has always been where previous rounds have broken down, and that's been going on for months now.
Well, Julie, as you say there, I mean, these ceasefire talks have been deadlocked for a while. If the actual details in this agreement are not different, then what has changed? Is it just the fact that Donald Trump wants to force some sort of deal on the two sides?
Well, the context has certainly changed in a number of ways, and mostly because of the recent, now so-called 12-day war between Israel and Iran. First of all, this just gives Bibi Netanyahu a bit more movement within his government. He can go for a ceasefire deal that some in his coalition are still against, but still keep his coalition government intact, because other ministers within Israel will back him in a way that they wouldn't have before because of the success of Iran. So he has a bit more political maneuverability at the moment. The other thing is Trump. Trump has wanted a Gaza ceasefire really since coming into office, but has not really made it his priority, despite some initial comments back earlier. And what we have seen again since this last operation in Iran, one, Trump is refocused on the Middle East. Two, he knows he has leverage with Israel by the U.S. carrying out those strikes. He wants something in return. And third, he really sees this as a moment to reorient the Middle East. He wants to see those Abraham Accords come through, wants to see those normalization agreements come through, and any of those depend on that Gaza ceasefire, so he's going to push the Israelis hard.
Julie, it has been a pretty grim week in Gaza leading up to this. I wonder if you could talk about some of the developments there and whether you do think that perhaps some of Israel's strikes on Gaza were more aggressive in a sort of recognition that their time was up.
Well, things have been it's indescribable how just worsening things have become in Gaza really over this last month. And that's on the humanitarian level. The number of aid distribution points have been reduced from over 400 to 4 under a particular arrangement by Israel and the U.S. There have been over 500 people killed at aid distribution points over this last month also. Over 80% of the strip is under evacuation orders and under military orders. And as you noted, just the military operations themselves are continuing. Some in Israel have said that these are pressure points on Hamas to push them towards a ceasefire. But at the same time, we've had Netanyahu saying that he wants military and security control over Gaza to continue even after the war. So very intense for Gazans as it's been, and just the continued displacement and devastation that does not show signs of letting up, and it's one reason why many in Gaza just hope the ceasefire does go through in some way, shape, or form.
Well, but Julie, when you describe it that way, what's happening in Gaza, how much of that would actually change if there was a ceasefire? That would mean an end to military strikes, but would it actually improve in some ways humanitarian access points, anything else that you were talking about there?
Yeah, it's difficult to know right now, Chris. First, just getting the cessation of military operations would be some relief. And with that, we usually see an ability to get more aid in. If you remember, in the January to March ceasefire earlier this year, that did allow for an infusion of aid, a lot more trucks coming in, a lot more ability for international organizations to work there. And apparently that is one thing that Hamas is demanding in this current discussion, is to have some new mechanisms to replace this mechanism that's been in place for this last month and has caused such upheaval and chaos with the way aid is being distributed.
Well, we'll have plenty more on this in the coming days, I'm sure. But Julie, thanks for the moment. That was Julie Norman from RUSI. And now here's Monocle's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Argentina is hosting a summit of presidents of Mercosur and associated states in Buenos Aires. The fate of a landmark trade deal with the European Union, which France is trying to block, will be on the agenda. The deal would allow the EU to sell more vehicles, machines and pharmaceuticals to South America in return for allowing in more meat, sugar, rice and soybeans from the region. Iran has given final approval to a law passed by Parliament last month to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog. The development follows rising tensions between Iranian authorities and the agency's director, Rafael Grossi, and his response to U.S. attacks on nuclear facilities. And over 700 earthquakes have been rattling the islands off Kagoshima in southern Japan. The volcanic islands with steep cliffs are known for frequent seismic activity, and local residents have been enduring the tremors for over a week. Evacuating the island remains difficult, with only a twice-weekly ferry as transportation that takes over 10 hours each way. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Vietnam has just completed its most dramatic government restructuring since 1975, cutting its provinces and cities from 63 to just 34, basically overnight. The changes took effect yesterday, the 1st of July, merging entire regions, eliminating an entire level of regional government, and creating 6 megacities, including an expanded Ho Chi Minh City with over 14 million people. This does represent the largest administrative overhaul in nearly half a century. And I'm joined now by Michael Tatarsky, journalist based in Ho Chi Minh, author of the Vietnam Weekly newsletter, to tell us more. And Michael, this is such a big deal, the biggest since reunification of Vietnam half a century ago. What brought this on?
Yeah, it is a huge deal. And I realize for the people not in the country, it may seem a bit hard to comprehend, but, it would be like the U.S. cutting its number of states in half or counties in the United Kingdom. So this is part of an ongoing massive reform effort driven by General Secretary To Lam, who leads the Communist Party of Vietnam and is the most powerful leader in the country. He came into power last year after his predecessor passed away, and he's really turned into quite a economic focused, business focused leader, and is driving again just a kind of astonishing amounts of reforms all at the same time. In the largely with a long-term goal of streamlining bureaucracy. There's this acknowledgement, which has been talked about for years, that there was far too much red tape, too many administrative procedures, things like that, just too much bureaucracy overall. And so this is all in the name of with GDP growth is already quite healthy here, but accelerating that even further because the government has this long-term goal of becoming a high-income country by mid-century and needs roughly double-digit growth every year until then to reach that goal.
Michael, tell us more about this bureaucratic impact here, because the economic impact, as it were, because if you are cutting an entire sort of swath of government, how much will that improve red tape? How bad is red tape right now when it comes to cities and regional administrations?
Pretty bad. I mean, it's hard to compare it to other countries. This is an issue everywhere. But this is from everything from parents trying to get their kids into public school or visiting a hospital up to, foreign companies trying to invest and open a factory or something like that. There's just a lot of paperwork to fill out, decisions from various ministries and every level of government that sometimes can be contradictory. So earlier in the year, the government already merged a bunch of it, quite a few of its ministries. So that was kind of the first step in this process. Merging ministries that had relatively similar areas that they covered and things like that. So that got rid of a lot of just government, for lack of a better word. And now the geographic change is combining, as you mentioned, Ho Chi Minh City absorbed 2 provinces around it. So in theory, in the long run, this should improve connectivity and decision making in these areas that were already very connected economically. One of the provinces that absorbed is a huge manufacturing hub, and that will make it, again, in theory, easier if that economy is integrated directly into Ho Chi Minh City. So again, this has been known for years that there's a red tape problem here, and the government, they've talked about it, and this is by far the biggest steps they've taken, again, in modern Vietnamese history to try to address some of that.
Michael, can you paint a picture for us of what happened yesterday? You're describing the long term there, but what did this actually look like to sort of overnight have the number of regions and cities and provinces? I mean, was there a reaction? I guess the average Vietnamese person isn't really going to feel this in a day, but what did it look like?
I mean, that's kind of the funny thing, it's this historic move, but basically you wouldn't have even noticed. I mean, there were some literal physical signs, like them changing the names on the signs outside of certain government buildings because they got rid of these. Within cities, there's these areas called districts, and that was kind of the mid-level, I'm going to District 1 or District 5. Those are all gone. So changing the name of the former District 5 government headquarters or something like that.
So does this mean you have to go as a member of the public somewhere else? You have to figure out which office is now the one that's responsible for any kind of special, either public school or starting a business, whatever you need.
Sort of. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the confusing part, which people are, this will get figured out. I mean, a lot of these offices didn't physically move. It's still a bit confusing at times to even talk about. It's kind of so dramatic. I think the bigger change will be this also is in line with a digital government push where they're trying to get more processes able to be done online so people won't have to go to government offices so frequently. But by and large, I mean, I've talked to quite a few people who live here and they had no clue this had even happened. So I suppose you may notice the first time when it comes time to do something, perform some sort of public paperwork or, I mean, addresses will physically change, they won't have districts in the name anymore or something like that. But yesterday didn't seem any different from the day before it.
Well, then to go back to the sort of macro level, if you could paint a picture of that for us a little more. You talked about Vietnam wanting to become a high-income nation. Are you able to put any numbers on that? What's the expectation of just how dramatic, how big a change this is in terms of kind of giving the Vietnamese economy a boost?
Yeah, I mean, again, the goal is basically, I mean, there's math to it. I think I mentioned at the start, but to become a high income country by 2050, that it has to be something like 10% growth every single year for the next 25 years. And growth here has been healthy, generally in the 6 to 7, 8% range, which of course most countries would kind of kill for, but is not 10 or 11%. And I mean, there is a number to high income status. It has to do with per capita GDP, which I must admit I don't have off the top of my head, but I think it's something around $12,000, $13,000 per capita GDP, whereas Vietnam is now around 5,000. So, that's more than doubling their current amount over the next 25 years. Yes, I think that's close enough off the top of my head, close to the actual figures. And yeah, again, the government has set this goal of 8% growth this year. Through the first half, their growth was around a little under 7.5%. So that will be difficult to reach. But these reforms, I think, especially in moving into next year, because the Communist Party will choose new leadership in January of next year for the following 5 years, and I think after that is when these reforms are really expected to start to pay off once all of that is finalized.
Just finally, Michael, in terms of international investment, is this something that foreign companies complained about, the level of bureaucracy between cities, regions, and the national government? Do you expect that some foreign companies might be more willing to invest in Vietnam now?
Yeah, this has been a common complaint for years. Although that being said, there is still, year after year, tons of foreign investment into the country from South Korea, China, Europe, the U.S., you name it. So it hasn't. I mean, it's hard to say how much more FDI there may be if there had been less red tape, but this hasn't deterred too many people. But it's a frequent complaint. There's often the American Chamber of Commerce or the European Chamber of Commerce or something like that will have a meeting with government officials and bring up, bureaucracy, red tape is pretty much topic number one at any of these meetings. And again, the government officials frequently acknowledge it as well. So I think, the belief is that if you get rid of all of this, and through all this reform, I didn't even mention, but I think at least 100,000 civil servants will be made redundant. So, there's a question of what are those people going to do about work? Many of them are a little bit older, so not like earlier in their career. That is an issue. But by that metric, there will simply be fewer government officials to have to do paperwork with or get a signature from or that sort of thing.
That could make things easier, certainly. Michael Tatarski, author of the Vietnam Weekly newsletter in Ho Chi Minh. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and now to some in-house news, because Monocle Magazine's Summer Bonanza, the July-August issue, is on newsstands now, and as part of that, we're officially launching our new and improved quality of life survey today with a special event at the real estate firm Brookfield's newest Mayfair property. And joining us here in the studio before heading out to our Mayfair launch event is Monocle's editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. Tyler, welcome to London.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you here. Tell us about why you're here. What's happening tonight?
Well, there's many things here. Of course, you make it sound like we are heading out the door for the event in the next 12 minutes. That is not the case. First, the sun needs to come out in London because it was gorgeous weather. It was a bit on the hot side yesterday, but there is a promise of sunshine this afternoon. We're doing something, as you said, quite unique, obviously, working with one of the biggest asset players in the world with Brookfield. Of course, Brookfield having, an enormous portfolio of properties, really almost in every corner of the planet. And they have a fantastic new building on Grosvenor Street in London, beautiful roof terrace. And we are going to be doing the launch, really sort of the official launch for this issue. And as you said, with a new view as to how we've sort of looked at cities. And of course, Brookfield is very much at the intersection of these conversations about what makes for good urban living.
Tell us about that intersection. It's interesting to have a group like Brookfield involved. How do they think about something like quality of life? Do they think about it the same way that we do?
Well, I think tonight, I know we're going to be, of course, getting a number of Brookfield people around the microphone as well, and they'll probably be better too. I can't speak on their behalf. Let me speak on behalf of what we're doing. I think for hopefully those listeners who've already had the joy of the issue hitting their letterbox. We did something different this year because, of course, we've traditionally either had, our top 20, top 25 cities. And what we found over almost the last 2 decades, Chris, is that so frequently it was the Hamburgs, it was the Copenhagens, it was the Viennas, these cities sort of, it always did incredibly well. And we've talked about this over the past few weeks. And this was actually, how are we able to shine a light on places which maybe don't always come out on top? They might be geopolitically challenged. They might have security challenges, but there's still sort of many forces within it that make them great places to live. Tallinn being, a good example. Is it globally connected? Even like a Helsinki. No, but Helsinki is across the way. If you need to get around the world, you can make your way from Tallinn over to Vantaa. It's got this great adjacency. But, we said, if you want to just sort of, set up your stall, have a really good quality of life, have the Baltic on your doorstep, but also just being in an environment where there's just a focus on startup culture, why not make your way to Tallinn? Now, would it traditionally have actually made its way onto our list? Definitely not. And that was a little bit why we wanted to reshuffle things and say, well, actually, we've got 10 winning cities this year, and that's what we've delivered.
It's interesting that it was about both the fact that you're kind of shining a light on cities that might not have gotten attention otherwise, but you're also shining a light on issues that might not have gotten a direct attention. Startups in terms of Tallinn. Your city that you live in, Zurich, wins for mobility, also an important issue. Did that make you feel proud going around Zurich in the last weeks before you came here? Kind of bit of an extra smile on a tram?
Well, I've been in 2 cities over the past 2 weeks. Over the past days, in fact, which have done very well in our ranking. Of course, one is, as we said, Zurich from a mobility perspective. And again, the way we look at it, it's not just maybe mobility in the classic terms of, yes, is the city walkable? Does it have good trams? What is its approach to four-wheeled traffic, etc.? But also, what does it mean in terms of connectivity within a European context by rail? What does it mean in terms of also, what is its relationship with its hub airport? Can I get around the world from that city? So Zurich had to, of course, answer a number of questions, and that goes from literally making your way to the local Migros to pick up your milk, as much as having to fly across the Atlantic to Montreal. The other one I would say, though, is that's done very well, and this is the topic of safety and security, is Lisbon, and this was a city, again, by any measure, sort of globally. Here you have a city which people are flocking to at the moment. Partly because of various versions of what a golden visa still might look like. That's one aspect, but also that you have a city which has very, very low rates of property crime, petty crime, homicide, all the things that could potentially ruin your day or ruin your life potentially are really sort of not present when you look at the indexing in a city like Lisbon. So that is another one which did well, and again, one of the 10, and it's been chosen because it is just, it's a beacon of public safety.
Well, before we let you go, Tyler, I know you were also in Paris, as you mentioned.
Our winning city.
The winning city, the all-rounder. And there's a few things about that, both what it represents, why Paris for an all-round city. But we also wanted to ask you about a specific story from there, because this is also very Monocle, something we're into. Air France is launching its own restaurant at the top of the Lafayette. Tell us about that, this sort of entrance of an airline into the hospitality space. What does that bring to a city like Paris that, according to our quality of life survey, already has it all?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. So we had an event in Paris last Thursday. Of course, we were broadcasting all week from the city. Emma was in charge of running the briefing, running the daily out of our Paris studio all last week. Last Thursday, we had a wonderful event and a gentleman, Fabien Pelouse, who looks after all of Air France's really customer experience. And of course, Air France was very active during the Olympics last year. They've, of course, recently celebrated a significant anniversary. So they've been very active working with Galeries Lafayette department store. They had a wonderful pop-up where you could buy all kinds of just great iconic items, from reproductions of porcelain off of Concorde, etc. And now they've taken their their first-class experience, and they've done a restaurant at the top of the department store, which I just think is it's interesting when we look at sort of, brands want to always talk about experience today, and this is a way for them to market in a very interesting way. It is. I mean, I believe you can still get tables, but this, who would have thought that you would have had an airline taking their catering experience to the top of a respected retailer who already have a number of great catering outlets, a number of great restaurant outlets already, and bringing this to the French market, of course, for the height of the season. But it seems very much in line with how, I was just going through Doha Airport the other day, that there is a Dior cafe, there's a Fendi cafe. So you see the French luxury houses, and in this case, obviously, the national carrier as well, moving into the space. How do they get in front of their potential customers, passengers, in a different way?
And it is a rooftop as well, so about as close to the skies as you can get
on
the ground. Tyler Brûlé, Monocle's editorial director, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. This is The Briefing, and sticking with Paris, because while the French capital can bask in the glow of Monocle's quality of life survey victory, anyone planning a celebratory cigarette will find it increasingly hard to find a safe public space. That is because France, once quintessentially associated with smoking in everything from movies to public life and cafes, has now banned smoking from beaches and parks. And for more on this, we do cross over to Studio 5 in Paris, where Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief Simon Bouvier is standing by. Bonjour, Simon.
Bonjour, Chris.
I mean, you're not going to be having a cigarette indoor or outdoors right next to the Monocle Cafe and Studio over there, but tell us, how has life changed, Simon?
Well, at our cafe, not at all, because smoking is still forbidden inside and is still permitted on the outside terrace for those who want to enjoy a cigarette with their evening drink, as is the case everywhere in France still. So this new ban that came into effect yesterday has banned smoking in all outdoor areas that might be frequented by children. That's the idea of the policy. So that includes parks, beaches, public gardens, etc., bus stops. Really the idea here, and this is the first national ban in the European Union. Other countries like Italy and Spain, for instance, have regional level bans that are similar, but this is the first European nation to have a nationwide policy of this kind, is trying to prevent tobacco from entering spaces where people who are young and most vulnerable to taking up smoking are likely to be inspired to do the wrong thing, basically.
Well, Simon, to play something of a devil's advocate here, I just wonder whether the French you would think would be aware of this before now. Had there really been a problem that, people were smoking in front of children, for that matter? I mean, what's the reaction been there in terms of the public and the public life and how they go about their daily life?
Well, I think that in general, the reaction is a bit mixed. As you can imagine, smokers are not very happy that they're no longer going to be able to light up on their picnic blankets in the Jardin du Luxembourg. But at the same time, I think it's something that is in line with public health priorities. Everybody understands that it's not good for you and that it comes at a significant public health cost. So the government has also been transparent for years about the fact that it was trying to reduce smoking rates, and they've been relatively successful. It's at its lowest level since the 1990s, according to a report from the French National Public Health Agency, and it's also declining among young people. But, unfortunately, anybody who has walked past high school or collège, as they call them here, junior high school, I suppose, have seen definitely, 14, 15, 16-year-olds having a cigarette outside. So that's what they're trying to fix.
Finally, Simon, I do have to ask you this, I feel, on behalf of our own Fernando Augusto Pacheco, who is on after you. This would be his question. Is Paris losing its chicness?
Well, I, for one, don't associate chicness with tobacco, so I feel like it might be gaining in chicness by making sure that cigarette butts don't end up in beautifully manicured lawns and fine sandy beaches. But I don't think so. Not entirely objective here, but I think our chicness is only building, Chris.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, you've just wandered into the studio. I can't help but I have to ask you this question as well. Like, what is your feeling on this before we move on to your own topic?
Well, I don't want to start a controversy here, but, you know, the French, they have their laws, but I'm against this specific law. I think smokers are already suffering a bit too much, but, you know, I understand public health. I don't want to get into trouble here, Chris.
This said from a non-smoker in Fernando Augusto Pacheco himself. Well, Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief, Simon Bouvier, thank you very much for joining us from non-smoking public parks, Paris. This is The Briefing. Well, finally today, can ambassadors sing? Brazil's ambassador to the UK, Antonio Patriota, definitely can. And Monocle Radio's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, as I just telegraphed, is right here in the studio to tell us more about the chat with Ambassador Patriota and more about his music career too. Hello, Faye. I put you on the spot there.
You know, I was glad to talk about smoking, but also about singing ambassadors. And this was such an interesting story. First of all, Antonio Patriota is a Monocle friend. Our foreign editor, Alexis Self, did a story for the magazine with him last year. So basically, Lex was together with Patriota for a full day, you know, to know what's the life of an ambassador. But then, you know, I met the ambassador in a party and we're just discussing. And then he told me, Fernando, I am a musician. I'm about to release my third album. I said, you know what, we need you back here in the studio to talk purely music. And that's fascinating. He does have a different name as a musician. It's not Antonio Patriota, it's Tonio de Aguiar. And I have to say, Chris, the album is great. It's a nice mix of blues, samba, bossa, even a little bit of fado as well, the Portuguese music style there. So I think it's fascinating, and I think it's very cool to have an ambassador who is also a musician.
Did you ask him about that? Kind of, it's always interesting when people have hobbies that go to this kind of level, as it were. Is that something that he was sort of aware of? He's doing this on the side.
Well, as you're going to be listening in the interview in a bit, I did ask, was diplomacy his first choice when he was a teenager? He said he was in love at first sight, but then he realized that. So, you know, it was either being a pop star or a diplomat. He chose diplomacy, but now he can also be a pop star at this stage of his career.
Fernando, we're going to listen to this interview in just a moment, but do you feel, I mean, will this rise to the level of the Monocle musical curated list of songs on Monocle Radio?
I think so. I think it's going to be very charming. In fact, the interview starts with a clip of one of the songs from the album.
Esqueço as cicatrizes e procuro no meu coração aquilo que nos traz saudade, a melhor verdade é viver.
Antonio Patriota, the ambassador of Brazil to the United Kingdom, welcome to Monocle Radio.
Thank you.
And we're
happy to be here.
We're not discussing only diplomacy and politics here. We're discussing music. You are also a musician, and that's fascinating. Perhaps you are the only ambassador in town that can have also released albums?
Well, I wouldn't bet on that because many colleagues also play an instrument, some of them much better than I do. I'm not a professional musician, but I studied classical piano when I was growing up, and I've always had this desire to compose and to produce music. So about 10 years ago, I started doing this. The professional aspect of what I record is to a great extent thanks to my producer, Leo Gandelman, who's maybe the major saxophone player in Brazil, a very experienced musician, and someone who believed in me.
Was there a case, let's remember, of a young Patriota, you were growing up, you knew you wanted to be a diplomat, or were you seriously considering perhaps to have the career of a musician?
Well, my father was a diplomat, so I grew up traveling around the world and living in different countries. I always loved music and art, and, let's say, the humanities. I studied philosophy at university, and I have to confess that diplomacy was not love at first sight for me, because when I looked at the lifestyle of diplomats, it seemed to be a little bit too much determined by protocol and unwritten rules, etc. And I was kind of bohemian when I was younger. But at some point, I realized that I was also very intrinsically Brazilian, and that I spoke languages, I had been exposed to an international life. So it seemed to me like a good fit to work for Brazil, continue traveling, and maybe on the side develop something artistic as I went along.
I mean, you mentioned being very Brazilian. I think if there is a country in the world that can teach other countries how to loosen up a bit, it would be Brazil, right?
Yes, that's true. It's curious because in Brazil, you have a rather relaxed lifestyle, but within diplomacy, you have a rather ceremonial and hierarchical, let's say, working environment. So reconciling the two is not always obvious.
That's a good answer. Of course, I want to talk to you about your new music that's coming out later this month. But you have already albums. I have 2 albums in front of me, Estuário and Geografia do Sentimento. But your name as a musician is actually Tonio de Aguiar. So is that a way to separate your diplomatic side and your musician side?
Absolutely, yes. Well, I decided to create a different persona for my musical work, and Tonio is a nickname for Antonio, is how my siblings called me. And Aguiar is actually my middle name. In the Iberian, Latin American tradition, we use both the last name of our father and our mother. And my Aguiar relatives were actually all very musical. So was my father, by the way. But I grew up less in contact with my father's family. So to some degree, it's a tribute to the musicality of my forebears.
You play a different styles. There's a little bit of samba, a little bit of bossa, a little bit of blues, quite a lot of blues and jazz as well for the upcoming album, which is called Meio do Céu. Is it any different perhaps from your previous releases, or what can you tell us about this new album?
There are a few new aspects. One of them is that I sing more. At first, I was very shy about singing, so I invited, in fact, extraordinary singers like Paolo Morellimbaum, who sings a song in Italian in my previous album, a young singer from Rio called Teca Ferreira, João Cavalcante, who sings a Carnaval do Ano Que Vem, a samba song. But as I went along and I tried singing, again, my producer decided that it sounded good and good enough, and that I should pursue this to the extent that I felt comfortable doing it. So in this new work, there are 13 songs in the new album, and I sing in 8 of them, actually in 3 different languages, in Portuguese, English, and Spanish.
Into a meaningless fate, uphill under a trine, together, Lisbon extinguishing time.
The soothing sounds of Antonio Patriota there, Brazil's ambassador to the UK, in conversation with Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Carlotta Rebello. Researchers were Ryuma Takahashi and Henry King, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.